She had only 12 seconds to disarm the device before the entire compound would be reduced to rubble, and everyone knew the rookie explosive specialist would never make it in time. Captain Sarah Chen's hands moved with surgical precision over the tangle of wires, her breathing steady despite the chaos erupting around her. The other soldiers had already begun their retreat, convinced that the small Asian woman who barely looked old enough to be out of college would fail, just like she had failed every speed test in the academy. Sarah Chen had never been the obvious choice for the Army's elite explosive ordnance disposal unit. At 28, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with delicate features that made seasoned soldiers mistake her for a secretary rather than a specialist trained to handle the world's most dangerous explosives. Her path to the EOD unit had been unconventional, starting with a PhD in chemistry from MIT and a quiet determination that most people mistook for weakness. The Fort Belvoir training facility buzzed with testosterone and skepticism the day Sarah arrived. Master Sergeant Rick Murphy, a 20-year veteran with arms like tree trunks and a voice that could shatter glass, looked her up and down with obvious disdain. "Command sent us a scientist," he announced to the assembled trainees, his words dripping with contempt. "Hope she knows the difference between a textbook and a battlefield." The other candidates snickered. There was Jake Morrison, a 23-year-old hotshot from Texas who could disarm a standard IED in under 90 seconds. Tommy Rodriguez from Chicago, whose hands moved like lightning through any mechanical challenge. And Marcus Webb, the colonel's nephew, who never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of his military lineage dating back to World War II. "Chen, you're up," Murphy barked during the first practical exercise. The device before her was a standard training simulator, designed to test speed and nerve under pressure. The timer showed 2 minutes. Jake had completed it in 47 seconds. Tommy managed 52. Marcus clocked in at a respectable minute 15. Sarah approached the device methodically, her fingers tracing the wiring patterns with careful precision. She identified the primary circuit, located the backup triggers, analyzed the redundancy systems. The timer ticked past 2 minutes, then 3. Murphy's face grew red with frustration. "Time!" he shouted. "Chen, you just killed yourself and everyone in a 3-block radius. This isn't a classroom where you can think for an hour about every little wire." The snickers grew louder. Jake leaned over to Tommy. Maybe she should stick to mixing chemicals in a lab somewhere safe. But Sarah had noticed something the others missed. The device contained an unusual copper wire configuration that created a false redundancy system. Following standard speed protocols would have triggered a secondary explosion. She tried to explain this to Murphy, but he cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Save the excuses, Professor. Speed kills in this business, literally." Week after week, the pattern repeated. Sarah would take twice as long as the others, methodically analyzing each component while her classmates breezed through the exercises. Murphy grew increasingly frustrated with her careful approach, dubbing her "Turtle" in front of the other trainees. The nickname stuck, and soon everyone was calling her that behind her back. During combat simulation exercises, Sarah's small frame made her an easy target for ridicule. She couldn't match the physical strength of her male counterparts, couldn't carry equipment as quickly across rough terrain. When they practiced under simulated battlefield conditions, she would arrive at scenarios slightly behind the others, already marked as the weak link before she even began working. "The Army doesn't have time for PhD dissertations on every piece of hardware," Murphy told her after another slow performance. "Either pick up the pace or find yourself a new career path." But Sarah's background had taught her something her classmates hadn't learned yet. Growing up in a family that had fled war-torn Cambodia, she had learned from her grandfather, a former engineer who had survived the Khmer Rouge by paying attention to details others missed. He had taught her that speed without understanding was just another form of recklessness. "The Americans always want to rush," he would tell her in his broken English. "But the bomb does not care about your schedule. The bomb only cares about being understood." 3 months into training, the dynamics began to shift during a complex scenario involving a simulated car bomb. The device incorporated multiple trigger mechanisms, including pressure plates, motion sensors, and a radio-controlled detonator. Jake attacked it with his usual confidence, moving quickly through the primary circuits. He had the device mostly disarmed within 90 seconds, a new course record. But as he reached for the final wire, Sarah noticed something that made her blood freeze. The radio antenna was still active, and there was a secondary receiver hidden beneath the main circuit board. Jake's rapid approach had missed it entirely. "Wait," she called out, but Jake was already reaching for the primary detonator wire. "Stay back, Turtle," he said without looking up. "Let me show you how it's done." Sarah lunged forward, grabbing his wrist just as he was about to cut the wire. "There's a secondary receiver. If you cut that wire without disabling the backup radio trigger, you'll set off the entire device." Jake jerked his hand away angrily. "Get off me! I know what I'm doing." Murphy stepped forward, his face stern. "Chen, step away from the device. Morrison, complete the exercise." But Sarah held her ground. "Sergeant, if you look at the antenna configuration, you'll see there's a backup frequency modulator connected to a secondary power source. It's designed to trigger if the primary system is disabled too quickly." Murphy's expression showed his skepticism, but something in Sarah's voice made him pause. "Explain." Sarah pointed to the antenna. "The device is designed to catch exactly what Jake was doing. Speed disarmament triggers the backup system. You have to disable the radio receiver first, then wait for the capacitor to discharge, then approach the primary trigger. It takes approximately 4 minutes. "That's ridiculous," Jake protested. "I've never seen a system like that." "Because it's new," Sarah said quietly. "It's based on a design that insurgent groups have been using in Southeast Asia for the past 6 months. The intelligence reports came through 3 weeks ago." Murphy's face went pale. He had indeed received those reports, but like most of the old-school instructors, he had been slow to update the training scenarios. Sarah had read every intelligence briefing, studied every new technique being used in the field. "Chen, disarm the device," Murphy ordered, his voice suddenly respectful. Sarah approached the simulator with her usual methodical precision. She disabled the radio receiver first, waiting for the electronic systems to reset. She traced the backup power source and disconnected it from the main circuit. Only then did she approach the primary detonator, carefully cutting the correct wire sequence. The device powered down safely. The room fell silent. "Time," Murphy announced. 4 minutes, 12 seconds. Jake's face was red with embarrassment and anger. "Anyone can disarm a bomb slowly," he muttered. But over the following weeks, more scenarios began incorporating the new techniques that Sarah had studied. Her careful approach, once seen as a weakness, began to pay dividends as the training devices became more sophisticated. She was still slower than the others, but her success rate was perfect. Jake had failed 3 scenarios. Tommy had failed 2. Even Marcus had struggled with the more complex devices. The turning point came during a field exercise at the remote Yakima Training Center in Washington State. The trainees were participating in a joint operation with actual deployed units returning from overseas. The exercise was designed to test their skills under realistic battlefield conditions, with real soldiers depending on their expertise. Sarah was assigned to Bravo Company, led by Captain Maria Rodriguez, a veteran of 2 tours in Afghanistan. The company had drawn the short straw, getting the trainee who couldn't keep up with the physical demands of the field. Sarah could see the disappointment in the captain's eyes when they were introduced. "Can you handle the gear?" Captain Rodriguez asked bluntly, looking at Sarah's small frame. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, though privately she wondered if she could manage the 70-pound pack across the mountain terrain they would be covering. The exercise scenario involved a simulated village where insurgents had planted multiple explosive devices. The trainees would have to locate and disarm the devices while under simulated enemy fire, with real soldiers providing security. Jake, Tommy, and Marcus were assigned to Alpha, Charlie, and Delta companies respectively, all of which had drawn more advantageous positions with easier terrain access. Bravo Company's route took them through a narrow mountain pass that insurgents would typically use for ambush positions. Captain Rodriguez set a punishing pace, and Sarah struggled to keep up. Her breathing labored as they climbed the rocky terrain. The soldiers around her exchanged glances, clearly wondering if their EOD specialist would be able to function when they reached the target area. "Ma'am," Sergeant First Class Williams whispered to Captain Rodriguez, "maybe we should call for a replacement. The kid looks like she's about to collapse." Sarah overheard the comment and pushed herself harder, determined not to be the weak link that compromised the exercise. Her legs burned and her lungs felt like they were on fire, but she managed to keep pace with the unit as they approached the simulated village. The exercise began at dawn. Jake's team quickly located and disarmed 2 devices, radioing their success to the command post. Tommy's team followed suit, clearing 3 devices in rapid succession. Marcus managed to clear 2 more, though one took him longer than expected. Bravo Company's target area was more complex. Intelligence indicated that the insurgents had placed devices in a school building where civilians might be present. Sarah's job was to clear the building while Captain Rodriguez's soldiers provided security and evacuated any simulated civilians they encountered. The school was a 2-story concrete structure with multiple rooms and corridors. Sarah began her sweep on the ground floor, using her detection equipment to locate the hidden devices. She found the first one quickly, concealed inside a desk in what appeared to be a classroom. As she began her analysis, she could hear the impatience in the voices around her. The soldiers were exposed, maintaining security positions while she worked. Every minute she took increased their vulnerability to simulated enemy attacks. "How much longer?" Captain Rodriguez asked through the radio. "I need another few minutes to analyze the trigger mechanism," Sarah replied. She could hear frustrated sighs from the soldiers around her. This was exactly the kind of situation where her slow, methodical approach became a liability. In a real combat scenario, speed was often more important than perfection. But as Sarah studied the device, she realized it was far more sophisticated than the standard training explosives. The trigger mechanism incorporated multiple redundancies, and there were components she didn't recognize from the training scenarios. She took photos with her equipment and sent them back to the command post for analysis. The response came back quickly. "Unknown device configuration. Proceed with extreme caution." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't a training device. Someone had made a serious mistake, and a real explosive device had been placed in the exercise area. She keyed her radio. "Captain Rodriguez, I need you to evacuate the building immediately. This is not a training device." "Say again, Chen?" "Ma'am, this is a real bomb. I repeat, this is a real explosive device. We need to clear the area now." Captain Rodriguez didn't hesitate. "All units, emergency evacuation. Move, move, move." The soldiers began pulling back, but Sarah remained with the device. She couldn't leave it armed, not when there might be other exercise participants in the area. Other companies might enter the building later, or civilian contractors might access the site after the exercise concluded. "Jen, that's an order! Get out of there now," Captain Rodriguez commanded. "Ma'am, I can disarm it, but I need time. If this goes off, it could kill someone." Sarah's hands were shaking as she began to trace the wiring. This was unlike anything she had seen in training. The components were military grade, but the configuration was improvised, suggesting it might have been left over from a previous exercise or possibly even real ordnance that had been misplaced. Through her radio, she could hear the chaos as the exercise was halted and emergency protocols were activated. Real explosive ordnance disposal teams were being called in, but they were hours away. The exercise area was remote, and it would take time to get specialists to the location. "Chen, what's your assessment?" came a voice from the command post. Sarah studied the device carefully. "It appears to be a real explosive device, but I think I can disarm it. The trigger mechanism is similar to configurations I've studied in the intelligence reports. It's got multiple redundancies, but they're designed to prevent accidental detonation, not to resist disarmament." "Negative, Chen. Wait for the EOD team." But Sarah could see something the others couldn't. The device had a timer mechanism that hadn't been mentioned in the initial assessment. Hidden beneath the main circuit board was a small digital display showing a countdown. They had less than 20 minutes before the device would detonate automatically. "Command, the device has a timer, 19 minutes and counting." The radio crackled with urgent voices. The EOD team was still 40 minutes away. Even if they used helicopters, they couldn't reach the location in time. "Chen, can you disarm it?" Captain Rodriguez's voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the tension. Sarah took a deep breath, thinking of her grandfather's words about understanding the bomb. She began to methodically trace each circuit, identifying the power source, the trigger mechanisms, and the timer system. The device was complex, but it followed logical engineering principles. "I can do it," she said into the radio, "but I need absolute silence, no radio chatter." For the next 15 minutes, Sarah worked with complete focus. She disabled the timer mechanism first, buying herself additional time. Then she carefully disconnected the backup triggers, each one requiring precise timing and pressure. Her small hands, once seen as a weakness, allowed her to access tight spaces between components that larger fingers couldn't reach. With 3 minutes remaining on the timer, she reached the final circuit. The primary detonator was connected to the main explosive charge through a series of redundant pathways. She had to cut 3 specific wires in the correct sequence, with exact timing between each cut. Sarah's training took over. She made the first cut, waited for the system to reset, then made the second cut. The device's LED indicator shifted from red to amber. One more cut would either disable the device completely or trigger an immediate detonation. She studied the final wire configuration, double-checking her analysis against everything she had learned about similar devices. The intelligence reports had been clear about the specific sequence required for this type of trigger system. Sarah made the final cut. The device powered down completely. The LED indicators went dark and the timer display faded to black. "Device neutralized," she reported into her radio. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Captain Rodriguez's voice came through, filled with emotion. "Outstanding work, Chen. You just saved lives." The investigation that followed revealed that the device had indeed been real ordnance, mistakenly placed in the exercise area by a contractor who had confused it with training equipment. Sarah's decision to remain with the device and her successful disarmament had prevented what could have been a catastrophic accident. Master Sergeant Murphy was among the first to congratulate her when she returned to Fort Belvoir. "Chen, I owe you an apology," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. I've been teaching speed for 20 years, but you showed me that understanding is more important than velocity." Jake Morrison approached her later that day, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine respect. "I would have tried to speed through that device and probably gotten myself killed," he admitted. "Your approach saved everyone." The incident became a turning point for the entire EOD training program. Sarah's methodical approach was incorporated into the curriculum, and instructors began emphasizing the importance of thorough analysis over pure speed. Her grandfather's wisdom about understanding the bomb became part of the official training doctrine. When graduation day arrived, Sarah Chen stood at the top of her class, not because she was the fastest, but because she had proven that true expertise came from knowledge, patience, and the courage to trust her own judgment even when everyone else doubted her. Colonel James Harrison, the commanding officer of the EOD school, presented her with the Distinguished Training Graduate Award. "Specialist Chen represents the future of explosive ordnance disposal," he told the assembled crowd. "She has shown us that the most important tool in our arsenal is not speed, but understanding." Sarah's story spread throughout the military community, inspiring changes in training programs across multiple branches of the armed forces. Her approach to bomb disposal, once seen as too slow and academic, became the gold standard for handling complex explosive devices. Years later, when asked about that day at Yakima Training Center, Sarah would always credit her grandfather's wisdom. "He taught me that every bomb is a puzzle waiting to be solved," she would say. "You just have to be patient enough to understand what it's trying to tell you." The small Asian woman who had been dismissed as too weak, too slow, and too academic had revolutionized one of the military's most dangerous specialties. She had proven that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from moving fast, but from having the courage to move carefully when lives depend on getting it right.